Okay, so hello everybody and welcome. My name is Marina Morozova. I am a teacher, teacher trainer, and today I would like to talk to you about infographics. It's a little bit like 7 o'clock in the morning where I am, but I hope you won't fall asleep. Neither will I, so we will see. Okay, so I understand that as long as you're here, you're all interested in teaching grammar, which is some of the problematic points. And probably some of you are interested in infographics and how it could be implemented into our teaching practices. That's what we're going to be talking today. And so first of all, could I ask you to do the following thing? So if you are participating, so let's do it to the fullest extent. And whenever I ask you to do something, could you please type the answers in the chat? Okay, could you please now say if you agree, write yes or okay, or no, I won't type anything, whatever. Right, so I suggest that you participate as well. Yeah, even if you're not sure about the answer, it's okay to write, and we are going to discuss everything because there are no incorrect answers, even in grammar. So let's talk about that. And let's start. This is a little bit about me, all this. Can you see my presentation? Hi, Natalia. Okay. Hopefully you can see everything. You can see all the slides. Okay, so just a few abbreviations about me. So basically, I work with, actually I work in a variety of contexts. So probably what I'm going to be talking about is relevant to any background. So starting from probably teenagers, yes, and ending with, okay, why ending? All right, so basically, IHCYLT is my recent specialty. So I got this specialty in teaching young learners. So a lot of things I'm practicing, I try to adapt to young learners, which is quite problematic. And also I use this working with business students and working with English for academic purposes students at the universities, and basically in general English classes. So I think that you can apply what I'm talking about in a variety of backgrounds. All right, so again, for those participants who have just joined, could you please write the answers in the chat? Yes, if I ask you to do something, please. And yeah, so try to find the chat, yeah, and type something there like hi, yes, and so on. Okay, right, so let's start. And this is the first thing which we are going to be talking about, that infographics is not new. Basically, infographics has been with us for probably 1,000 of years, or 2,000 or even more. Even Romans were trying to use infographics. And if you try to read these small text in the left bottom corner, yes, so you won't be able to do it because I intentionally blurred it. So basically, if I ask you to look at the infographics on the right and tell me these small segments are months. So January, December, November, or January, February, March. So if I ask you, because this infographics concerns the number of casualties, or basically deaths during the war. So if I ask you actually in the 19th century, so please tell me in which month they had most casualties. So you will have no problem saying that this is January, because this is the biggest segment. So you don't need to read the text. You don't need to digest the information. Actually, a lot of information, and you don't need to interpret the potential of the text, because as we know, each text has so-called meaning potential. It means that different people may interpret it in different ways, and they are right to do this, depending on their perception. Do you now understand why our learners don't get some texts right and cannot cope with comprehension questions at times? So this is one of the reasons why. Okay, so basically, if we are talking about infographics, infographics is easier to interpret if we are talking about the text. But first things first, so we are going to talk about it a little bit later. So I actually started researching the infographics to find out how popular it is, and I found out that actually starting from about 2008, 2009, there had been actually some kind of increase, by the way, sometimes even steep increase, which peaked in about like 2013. And after that, there was slight decrease, but if you look at this like progression now, you will see that the interest in infographic has been unchanged. So basically it shows that about like infographics is used by about like a little bit over a half of the participants, so 50% of the participants, yes? So basically infographics is used for different purposes, but we are interested in educational. Okay, so why use infographics? As I told you about the text, about deaths, right? Infographics is useful when you want to break some complex issues into easier things. If you want your students to understand, yes, how something works, but the process is too complicated, and sometimes it's a good idea to use infographics instead of like commonly accepted long text. I will give you an example from my practice. In my EAP, English for Academic Purposes classes, we read a lot, but my students are not readers at all. Like out of 10, no one is a reader. So basically, that's the problem, you know, like when you ask them to read something, yes, so this is always a trouble. So you need to engage them to devise some extra activities. So once I decided to use infographics for that, and I told them that we are going to watch or to read The Godfather by Mario Puzo, but they were like, okay, unenthusiastic. So I brought the infographics. The very moment they saw the word mafia, they basically got really engaged and we started discussing all these things. And by the end of the course, everyone had read the text. More than that, actually, I had the adapted version for them. And like almost all of them read the original. So that was really cool. And I had never expected it would happen like this. So what we can say about infographics, it's attention grabbing. When they saw mafia, they were like, oh, okay, they're very interesting. Engaging. So basically it kept their interest to the very end of the book. Another thing is that infographics is visual and memorable. So basically, if you want to remember something and you have a text, there is a huge percentage that you will get demotivated by the end you work with this. And finally, infographics, I mean, images and a little bit of text is like 60,000 times faster processed if we compare it with normal text. So 60,000 times. So that's basically it. So I started thinking about something, and my contention was that sometimes I can use it in ESL classes. And what is really important, especially if you're working with teenagers, but like with any kind of audience, but with teenagers who are, I guess, more honest and who can say to you, okay, I don't care about that. I will never do this. Okay. So why should I do this? It's not interesting. So yeah, so for those people, I decided to start implementing infographics. So why did I do this? First of all, to generate their interest. Because sometimes if the infographics is interesting, if some information provided there is controversial, it can be the grounds of some debate. And actually, teenagers always have something to say, but sometimes probably they don't have the right words to say that. So basically, that's another part to work on, to increase the awareness of the issue. When we start learning such wonderful topic as environment, yes, we are starting to think, oh my God, it's really boring and so on. But there are lots of types of infographic when we are talking about this topic. And learners are becoming aware. So when they see it as a text, they don't care. But when they see it as a colorful infographic, they do. Okay, to illustrate a historical timeline and a sequence of events. So here I'm not talking about those timelines we're using in tenses, like to represent present simple or past continuous. No. This time we're going to be talking about how to generate learners' interest and how to get them speaking and using this grammar, looking at the timeline. This is going to be our next point. So to provide helpful tips and step-by-step instructions. So basically, sometimes learners need the checklists. Sometimes learners needs the how-to guides. And basically, sometimes it's the teacher who does that, but sometimes it's the learner who can do that as well. Then to highlight important statistics, sometimes we don't care about the numbers, but occasionally if you're looking at the number of these like human shapes, you will basically get the point, yes? And this is another thing, this is another ground for debate. Okay. So basically, how I use infographics in my ESL classrooms, just a few examples, yeah? So first of all, recently, about maybe not a month ago, but a little bit less than a month ago, I was in Malta and I was in the Visual Literacy Conference, which was organized by Kieran Donahue, who is the director probably and the CEO of Film English. So this is the site which contains a lot of images, namely texts, which are the grounds for some kind of lesson plans and engaging activities and so on. So Kieran believes that now we don't have 4 skills anymore, and actually it's not Kieran only, yes, we have 6 skills. And in addition to teaching, reading, listening, writing, and speaking, we also have 2 more skills, which is viewing, the ability to see or to look at the image and interpret the image, be it a static image like an infographic or a picture or a graph, and or even like if it concerns films, yes, so or short clips, advertising clips, whatever. And the 6th skill is representing, which is basically about being able to show what you have understood. So infographics is also about representing. And we are not only representing in writing. Sometimes we want to draw something. Sometimes we want to create an image of something. So this is also a skill to learn. And these 6 skills are the skills of the future. So I'm not talking about writing, dying out, and so on. There will always be people who will be writing because, you know, we have this multiple intelligences theory. We are all different. Some people prefer writing, some people prefer representing using infographics and other things. But we need to try to cater for a variety of styles, a variety of intelligences. Okay, so that's why I'm trying to encourage my learners to read and interpret the infographics. So whenever we see the infographics or whenever I bring it in class, I try to get them understand it in the right way. The same thing with things we do with the text. And if you look around, you will see a lot of infographics all around you, but sometimes students are unable to do this. Writing, so as I said, using it for writing as a prompt. So basically you start from a debate or discussion, and after that you can use these ideas for your writing assignment. Or using it as a checklist. Sometimes learners forget to use commas, linkers, the right tense, possibly some kind of structure. So basically in their infographics, they can try to focus on have I done this? Have I done that? And so on. So we are going to be talking about. And finally, feedback. Yes, so they can give they can give peer feedback to each other using infographics, like even the smallest ones, if you see 3 different smiles. So that's also a good idea. So instead of saying, oh my God, this is bad, this is good, they can even give feedback to themselves. Yes, so basically by simply touching a part of something. Okay. Some more. Also, I try to use a lot of TBL and PBL in my classes. This is task-based learning and project-based learning. So we do a lot of projects with my students because projects are meaningful and they get learners not only to think about what language to use, but just think about the task and use all the language they have at their disposal. Visual dictations or information gap activity. One of the examples could be if you have ever taken or prepared for IELTS, that could be a very interesting activity for you. 2 learners get 2 pieces of paper. On 1 piece of paper, the learner gets a graph. Can you imagine a graph or a bar chart or whatever? So basically, speaking about the changes in people's preferences in buying some goods or items, whatever. And another person has nothing, just the blank graph. So the person one, the teacher, should discuss or should describe this graph to person two, and person two actually draws this graph. This is a really interesting activity because both learners are active there. One of them is basically trying to interpret what they see. Another one tries to rely on listening, which is quite difficult, and understand and visualize what the person has been talking about. So basically, it's about viewing and representing. Okay, so if you have problems with this type of IELTS task, writing task part 1 in academic IELTS, so you're welcome to try. And finally, this is the activity which we are going to be talking about, using grammar and using infographics for contextualizing grammar and lexis. So basically, yes, so infographics could provide wonderful context for grammar. And that is what we're going to be talking about. Well, first of all, what I would like you to do, so here is the infographics I found online. And it shows you, sometimes the students like ask you, why should I learn grammar? Like native speakers don't use grammar. Okay, so this is one of the explanations to your students, how grammar can help you get a better job. So if you look at this infographics, just very quickly, I will give you about 1 minute. And could you please write your conclusion? So where is it better to study or work? In engineering and manufacturing, or finance and management? And you can actually write your answers in the chat. So you have about 1 minute to do this. Okay, finance. All right. Okay. Yeah, finance and management. Everybody opts for finance and management. Okay. All right. So basically, I do agree with all of you, but the contention is that, first of all, how reliable is this infographic? Do you really trust what you see? Do you really think it's the real information, like the information taken from reliable sources? So this is one of the things that my learners and I should also discuss, yes, about critical thinking and about questioning the source of the infographics. Actually, this infographics is not real. And I have been showing it to some of my students, and only one student asked me, like, where does it come from? So that was really good question. Another thing is the guy who was native speaker, he actually said, okay, why was is? Yeah, so, okay, it doesn't matter where you work, because in both fields, all of these salaries are quite high. So basically, but if you work in finance and management, you can make as many mistakes in grammar as you want. Yeah, so basically that's it. Okay, so the problem is, so what we were talking about, yes, like now let's a little bit shift to grammar. And when we are talking about dealing with grammar, we have two parallel and even contrasting extremes. Some people believe that it's a good idea to analyze the language. Like, you remember grammar translation approach, you have rules, and then you apply them, apply them, apply them. And the problems are that, yes, you know the rules, but they do not work all the time. Then appeared this like communicative methodology, which said, okay, you can basically use the language. It doesn't matter how many rules you know. It doesn't matter if you're sure about your English or not, just speak. But this is another extreme, yes, which we shouldn't rely on like 100%. So basically, the truth is somewhere in between. So analyzing the language, yes. Using the language, yes. So basically, we will look at the framework which tries to encompass both. This framework was devised by Dr. Diane Larson Freeman, and it consists of 3 dimensions. So basically, if there are any people with CELTA here, we all remember meaning, form, pronunciation, meaning, pronunciation, form. But this framework is a little bit more than that, and it should draw learners' attention, first of all, to the context. So in what context they are using this particular grammar form or grammar structure. And learners must be aware that this is not the only context. There are other contexts. Moreover, in other contexts, this phrase or this grammar structure could have different meanings. So basically, we draw their attention not only to the context, but also to the meaning, particular meaning in this particular context. And then we are drawing their attention to form. So basically, students need to be aware of the form, and they need to be able to notice the form of the grammar structure. So the thing is that we should devise such activities that our learners are not the ones who are listening to the teacher and trying to understand what the teacher is talking about. We need to try to devise the activities which get learners fully participate, yes, in all these tasks and make discoveries for themselves. So what I suggest we do, here is the context. As we started from the context, could you please tell me this context, in this context, what grammar can we teach? Could you please write it in the chat? I knew it. I knew that it would be present simple and it would be the... Okay, anything else? Think about something else. Your teachers. Okay, used to, great. Teaching time, yeah, but we're talking about grammar, yeah, basically. What grammar structures we can teach? So what if I told you that basically you can teach any grammar here? For example, you can teach almost any tense here, like past continuous. What were you doing at 7:30 yesterday? I was waking up. Oh, it's 7:30. Has he woken up? Okay, what will the president be doing at 7:40 tomorrow? He will be eating breakfast. Okay. He might be riding the bus if we are talking about models of speculation. So basically, it depends on your creativity. And this is not only for teaching present simple. Even sometimes it could be too boring because it's too obvious a question. And our learners are already aware that this could be present simple. You can teach it using, you can teach anything, yes? But basically try to be creative. And another thing, try not to get these things too far-fetched, yes? Because when you are trying to create the context which is not really realistic, yes? So basically you should try to avoid this. Okay, thank you. Right, so another thing. So speaking about contexts which are not really ones used in the textbooks. So when we're talking about present progressive or present continuous, we are all thinking about the situation, or we are all trying to devise the situation. Hi, what are you doing? I'm taking a shower. Okay, he's talking to another person in the shower. So basically, yes, sometimes it could be quite strange. But basically, we try to, and our students as well, they associate present continuous with now. But after that, they start having problems because this is not the only context they are using for present continuous. For example, another context that we could be using is trends. All of them are interested in some kinds of Facebook, Snapchat, and others. Yes, so and they're interested in what is happening to these trends. For example, this year, the popularity of Facebook is growing, while the popularity of Instagram is declining. By the way, this is realistic information, and we found it out online. Why we were learning these forms? Because we were preparing for IELTS, and basically the words like rising, declining, increasing, and decreasing were quite problematic for the learners. And here we found the meaningful context of something that they were really interested in. Okay, speaking about some other contexts and about me not being the only source of information for my learners. This is guided discovery activities. So I would like you to work a little bit. On the left, you see the infographics about life in the UK. So first you have a box for the number or percentage. Could you please speculate about the number or the percentage of Britons who have never had a job? Then the percentage of Britons who have never used the internet, and the percentage of Britons who have traveled abroad at some time in their lives. And could you please write this percentage, yes, with a comma, in the chat? Could be, yeah, 7585, okay. Fine, okay. Okay. Has anyone used 80? Because if you look at the right part, you will see the sentence. 80% of Britons have traveled abroad at some times in their lives. Not really, yes? Because as well as our learners, our attention is very selective, and we notice only whatever we are focusing on. This activity is aimed at showing you that sometimes your learners don't use grammar correctly just because they don't notice it, just because they don't see some forms. And later I will show you when I asked my students once to underline all the future tenses in the text, they underlined only will. They didn't underline will plus the base form or will be doing only will everywhere. So that's basically what they see. And when we are talking about present perfect, yes, which is basically the task of this, which is basically the target structure, we will see that sometimes students don't notice have, so they just see traveled. This is problem number one. So how I decided to go around this problem and to solve it. So I was trying to implement the guided discovery approach. Guided discovery is about, first of all, generating students' interest in the grammar form, in the context, by using infographics in this case. And if you look at all the sentences in the infographics, they all contain present perfect. So basically, after that, I took some of the sentences with already real numbers because they discussed it. Then I asked them to listen to the recording. Then we compared the percentage with Ukrainian people, blah, blah, blah. And then we looked at grammar. And I highlighted have traveled and have never used. And after that, I asked them to think about the following questions. So, do the verbs in bold refer to a specific time in the past or a time in the past which is not specified? And here I'm driving them to one of the concepts which differentiates present perfect from past simple, which is time which is not specified. Of course, we know that this is only one of the concepts. Secondly, I ask them to look at the following thing. Do they describe facts in the past or experiences? And this is another thing, because all of them will say that all of these things in the infographics are facts. And they will be right, because they are facts in our understanding of things. They are facts in our culture, but they are experiences in their culture. So by asking these questions and discussing them with the learners openly, I'm driving their attention, or I'm drawing their attention to understanding the concept of present perfect as it should be. Time not specified, then experience, yes, so some kind of experience, then result, whatever, recent action, but we are going to be talking about it later. But first of all, my task and my contention is that my students should notice the form and notice the meaning and do it in the meaningful context, which is interesting for them. And as you see, this context I created with the infographics. Okay, another thing, noticing activities. So basically, what we should do is get our learners to notice more, not by pointing, don't you see, what's this? No, but getting them aware of the forms. And the thing is that most often, Mr. Richards, a famous linguist, believes that people do not use grammar correctly and do not use correct forms, not because there is something wrong with them. They just don't see these forms. So your task is to ensure that the learners can basically do this. Okay. Here is one of the tasks which we did with them. So how I wanted them to ensure that. So first of all, we were discussing the timeline of the future. And again, I used the infographics because I didn't want them to read the long texts. So they looked through the infographics and I asked them to tell me which prediction about the future they think is the most interesting for them, which prediction they trust and which prediction they find unlikely to happen. So we were discussing that and I found out that my students are really interested in the future. Like, that's surprising because you never know what they may be interested in, but this is one of the things. Secondly, I asked them to underline all the future forms. My learners underlined will everywhere, only will. Of course, yeah, of course, that was not right because it was not only will here. In this text, by the way, there is a lot of future simple, future continuous, future perfect, but not only that. This text contains might for the future, should for the future, is likely to for the future, which are also very common things which we can use when we are talking about the future. So basically, I understood that my learners who were like about B2 level at this time, they regard concept of future as will only. They don't regard might, they don't regard other forms. That was strange for me. So basically, we underlined all these forms. So I got my students to notice that. And then secondly, I devised some very easy questions just to differentiate between will be doing, will have done, and so on. So just to differentiate between fact, results, process, the fact which is not likely to happen, and so on. So basically, my learners were trying to discover the answers for themselves. Of course, then we discussed this and we went to the next step. So basically, a short infographics about what I did. So noticing. First, to give learners the infographics, the text, whatever. The problem with the text sometimes, of course, should be read first, at least for gist. And after that, they need to underline the things there, so some kind of concepts and so on. The problem is that sometimes the text is too long and students can get bored. That's why I use the infographics, so minimal text and visuals. After that, I used guided discovery activities to draw their attention to the meaning of each structure. Not by asking them or telling them, oh, this is present perfect or this is future perfect. No, but by getting them to come up with their own conclusions. And then we were discussing what they were talking about. Then we specifically focused on forms. So I basically gave them a controlled practice task in which they had to fill in the gaps with some forms or open the brackets using some forms. And we looked at different ways we can do something. After that, I asked my learners to do a personalized task, because we all know that if you are talking about yourself, the language becomes more meaningful to you. You expropriate this language. Now you own this language. But I decided to do more than that. I got my learners to devise the infographics with their own predictions for the future. Some of them devised the predictions for their life. Some of them devised the predictions for the planet. It doesn't matter. The thing is that it became meaningful for them. Then we looked at all those predictions, again, corrected some inadequacies with the forms, with the structures, discussed something. And after that, basically, they presented their final draft to everybody. So that got them to focus on grammar a little bit more because they wanted to be understood. When they realized that there is the difference between might want and will want, so basically, they started like getting their like forms a little bit more accurate, because they wanted to give this infographics to other people and to get them understand that. So the task became meaningful. All right, as for other contexts in which we also used the infographics. For example, some of my learners like sharing information about their followers. And they thought, wow, this is the perfect grounds for teaching present perfect and present perfect continuous. Especially the number of participants has been decreasing, has been increasing, and so on. And you know what? With girls, it stuck, because for girls, it was a meaningful activity, because they do care how the number of their followers changes. The boys, they were not that enthusiastic, but still they remembered this context because it was quite unusual for them. I guess more unusual that I have been learning at the university for 5 years, which is the typical context somewhere. Yes. So basically that stuck, that worked. I'm not saying that it's universal approach, and basically you know your learners and you can use your own context for that, but that's what worked with me. I decided to do more than that, and I went to speaking about trends. But the like latest trend here was spring 2017. And we looked at the changes in the usage of different applications, yes, and up to this time, up to spring 2017. So everybody understood that the information was outdated, and then we got to understanding that present perfect continuous cannot be used there anymore. So that's what we can say, that the popularity of Snapchat had been increasing, had been decreasing, and so on. Yes, and guess again, we were preparing for IELTS. We were preparing for writing task 1 academic. Okay, next thing. My favorite one is about biographies and narrative tenses. Like when you want to get your learners to differentiate between different tenses, there are several ways to do this, but one of them is purely practical, and it is to find a person you believe who you believe your role model is. So what I did, first of all, I brought Einstein to the class with a wonderful infographic which I found online. It's a very long one, but this is only a part of it. The problem is, first of all, that my students didn't know who Einstein was. Some of them believed he was a politician, and that was really strange. But they knew his face. They said Einstein, but they didn't know anything else about him. So first we were discussing his life. So basically I told them about his life. They asked me some questions. And while I was telling that, I used a variety of tenses. After that, we looked at the forms. We tried to understand like where we use like past continuous, where we use past perfect, and so on. We also discussed interesting facts which were connected with his life and childhood, that he was a slow learner, and most of my students were really surprised to know that a genius could be a slow learner. So that was really interesting for them, an interesting insight. And after that, I got my learners to focus, of course, focus on the form. And we did some controlled practice activity. And then I asked them to devise the life of their own role model. So basically, they had to create the infographics of someone who they believe is their role model. So a lot of people brought in some kind of famous actors, whatever. One of the guys brought in the lifespan of his father. And that was really interesting because, yeah, of course, this guy had to use a variety of tenses, like a different variety of tenses. But when we were having an open class, he brought in this infographics to the open class, because actually to this open class, they could have brought any kind of infographic we had created or any kind of project. But these guys chose this one, and his father was crying. Maybe because he was emotional, or maybe because his grammar was not that accurate, but still the guy was struggling. He was trying to do this. And this is one of the things when you are making the task meaningful. So they have these grounds for using not only past simple, and they are creating something which is really important for children, young learners, and teenagers. Okay, basically some of my IT students also, like quite, I can say, like who are already like big dadkas, so like They basically also like such kinds of tasks, and they do a lot of infographics because they can do it fast. And basically, they also create these types of like narratives, biographies, and so on. But some people, I found out, are not really interested in other people, but they're interested in money. So we looked at the history of money. And basically, you can find history of everything, whatever you want online, especially with the infographic. You see that this infographic is a little bit more complicated. So first, it can work as a text. So you can actually get a gist task for them. Secondly, it could work as the ground for the debate. And only after that, you look at different tenses used here. And as you see, or as you don't see, as you may trust me, they are using a variety of tenses: past simple, past continuous, past perfect. After that, they create their own infographics of something, of the internet, the history of the internet, the history of whatever. Okay, another thing to talk about: models of speculation. My favorite one is mysteries, and I bring in different mysteries to my students. This is the mystery they are really interested in, the mystery of missing socks, which is solved. They got really interested, and by the way, we had a long discussion about where the missing sock could be or could have been lost. So basically, model verbs of speculation worked. Another thing is teaching conditionals, yes? And your learners already have some kind of experience in, for example, learning a language, yes? And here they had some reasons why you should learn a second language and how you should learn it. And it's wonderful grounds for using if you do something, you will do other thing. And most of us, yes, are aware of the fact that in our culture, people tend to use if you will use, yes? This is the problem, which is the fossilized mistake at many levels. So why not? We can use this infographic as a drill. So basically, whenever they name the new point, they just say, if you do this, you will get this. And as many times as they repeat this thing, they will drill this form. So basically, it becomes really mechanical. After that, of course, they create their own infographics on how to do something, how to be a better teacher, how to manage your time, whatever. And then they are relating to, like, other people are relating to that, and they are having some kind of the debate. Again, they create everything by themselves, which is a good idea. After that, my favorite topic, teaching articles, countable and uncountable nouns. Some of my students are teenagers, some of my students are IT students, some of them are EAP students, but most of them want to relocate for some reason. So some of them want to live in Australia. And one day I said, okay, let me bring the infographics of living costs in Australia, and we will calculate how affordable it is for us. So we started calculating, and of course, in the course of calculating, we needed some articles, and we needed to focus on countable and uncountable nouns. Unfortunately, by the end of the lesson, they actually already understood that they didn't want to go to Australia. Now they want to go to Canada because they decided it was cheaper. But the thing is that, yes, we focused on articles and on the concept of countability, uncountability, which worked really nice. And after that, they were to decide to devise their own infographics on different things. Yes, so basically one of them was just to calculate the cost of living in my country, and they were really like surprised, most of them, especially IT specialists. So they were, oh my God, really? How can people live on such little money? Yes, really. So again, that was another grounds for discussion and for using grammar. One more thing, work patterns. It's a little bit on time management. You should avoid do something, try to manage to do everything on time, and so on. Because verb patterns, manage to, avoid doing, and so on, are best learned in a context. And they are best learned if they are if you draw your learners' attention to it. In the same way, first of all, they discuss what they see in the infographics. After that, they try to focus on form, do the controlled practice activity. And after that, we are dealing with some kind of, so they create their own infographics by themselves. So how I try to plan grammar lessons with infographics. So there are basically two main concepts which I'm trying, or frameworks, which I'm trying to implement there. The first framework is the framework of PPP, presentation, practice, production, which for me, unfortunately, doesn't work. Why? Because when you're working with the infographics, your main activity is not to work with the language. Your main activity or your main aim is to do the task. So to understand the infographics, to interpret the infographics, and probably to devise the infographics, which shifts the focus from the language to the task. That's why I decided to use the TBL, as you see the second one, yes, which is task-based learning framework. It's not new, but not many people use that. So you just shift the student's focus from learning the language, or like being oriented at learning the language only, to being oriented at doing the task. It is becoming more student-centered because while they are doing the task, you're going around them and monitoring. And of course, you grab some language and write it down that the learners cannot cope with professionally. And sometimes, for example, when you're talking about the future, you understand that they use only will do, will go. So that makes their speaking a little bit unnatural. So you think, okay, why not? This is B2 level, so let's focus on this a little bit more. Another thing, of course, in the infographics, they can see some other phrases and some other structures which they could use. After that, so I ask my students to discuss that. We focus on different kinds of forms. We focus on meaning. And then I ask them to devise their own infographics and then present it, or we do this gallery walk when they put it all around the room and everybody comes up and speculates about the infographic. So basically it turns into a meaningful activity. Sometimes it's not only one lesson, and I don't do it every day. I actually try to teach grammar in a variety of methods, but this is one of the most effective methods, because sometimes my learners are most of my learners are visual, and infographics is visual. So they want to see something, they want to interact with something, with information, with the text, and it's very hard to interact with letters. But with images, it is much better. Okay, after that, we are moving on to some creative tasks, which you could use. Some of them are charts. For example, sometimes I ask my students to devise some kind of charts for events and biographies. We have already discussed that. Some guides, how to start dating with the guy you like. Another infographic. Comparing. This is my favorite one. Recently, we were choosing a, what was it? We were trying to buy a car, and there was a limousine, and there was a Mercedes, and a Lamborghini. And basically, I know nothing about cars, but my learners helped me to come up with a list of aspects and factors which are crucial in buying a car. And basically, we devised all these infographics together, and then we chose the best one, and everybody grounded their own options. So this is another meaningful activity. And you know what? While we were comparing all these things, the language of comparison came up. And not only by more and the most, which is not a very typical form for the language speakers, native speakers, but I found out that my learners also, like native speakers, they tend to use as, not as. And that was real a revelation for me, because I always thought that typical comparisons are about more and er. Not really. So, and even if you Google or research, you will see that as, and not as is much more common in corpus linguistics than this more and er concept. Okay, basically, but that was another, that was the revelation for me. Also, we create graphs, as I told you. So sometimes we make this visual dictation, sometimes we draw it, sometimes we use the infographic, sometimes we use the application. It depends on how low-tech or high-tech we are. Also, when we are doing tasks like find someone who, have you ever been abroad? Have you ever flown to the moon? And so on. After that, I want my students to represent the results of the people they have surveyed. and they use the infographics for that. And this is another ground for talking about infographics and for using grammar meaningfully. So basically, these are the main things we do. Also, what we do with infographics. There are several activities which get learners to think deeper about the information they get in the infographics. So first of all, I get the learners to look at the same infographics, like two groups, and devise a set of questions for their opponents or for another group, yes, or for the other group. It depends on how many groups there are. And after that, they quiz each other. So basically, I call it a peer quiz. Instead of me devising all these questions and leading the conversations, sometimes my students take the lead, and this is wonderful. Okay, number 2, checking sources. The same thing, I asked you to look at the infographic. You remember about this, like how grammar helps you get a better job. And then I asked you, do you know how reliable this infographics is? My students, especially teenage students, always ask this question. So this is good because they do have critical thinking. Summarizing. Instead of writing a summary, you can make it visual. So after reading the text, you can make an infographics of this text. And after that, you can get learners working together and try to interpret their infographic, which is quite interesting and quite visual. Spotting facts. So spotting some facts which you find interesting, like we did with the infographics with future. Namely, like what fact do you consider to be the most likely to happen? Which one is the most unlikely to happen? Which one do you trust in? Which one you don't? And why? And so on. And my favorite one is who am I? Where am I on this infographic? So like if we're talking about this infographic, so what ideas resonate with me? What ideas I find most interesting? Yes. What ideas I would like to speak about a little bit more, and so on. So basically, that's how we deal with infographics. And how about choosing a topic? So especially when you are dealing with teenagers, you need to understand that the topic should be age appropriate. I'm not talking about some creepy topics, strange topics. No, I'm talking about some topics like environment, for example, which the learners may not be ready for. Usually I have some kind of survey, basically not even a survey, an interview or a questionnaire at the start of the course, which we usually call the needs analysis, yes, diagnostics. And basically I get my learners to choose or tick the topics on the list that they would like to work with. And I was surprised, like this year, my B1 pre-intermediate group basically didn't want to speak about crimes, like most of them. When I started introducing this topic, despite the findings, yeah, I understood that it won't work there. So sometimes it's a good idea to listen to your learners. I'm not saying just take everything away. No, just modify, change it a little bit. Also think about level appropriateness. So when you remember this I+1 hypothesis, which was introduced by Krashen, that the input, yes, so basically the text in the infographic should be no more than one level higher than the current level of your students. So for example, coming back to my B1 pre-intermediate group, the level of the infographics should be B1 plus intermediate. Because if it is B2, my students will start struggling with that, and I will have to devise the tasks which are a little bit different. Okay, then look at the topics which resonate with your learners, because only these topics will help them to use the language meaningfully. And of course, if the topics resonates, it will be engaging and it will generate a great deal of discussion with your learners. So basically, here are some sources of infographics which you can find online. So Pinterest is one of the most common one. World Factbook is the source created by Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and they know a lot of facts about different countries, surprisingly. So basically, but sometimes they could be really interesting to look at. So my learners, they're really interested in that, and this is one of the most widely used sources. Google Public Data Explorer is also another one, which I regularly use as a teacher. Visually and daily infographics. So these are the sources where you can use the infographics I mean, not freely, but at least meaningfully with your learners. After that, if you want to create the infographics with your learners and you have the access to the internet and you have the opportunity to do it in class, because yeah, it could be quite fast. My favorite is Canva, and all this presentation was made in Canva, so it's in the second column, but all of them are really nice. Like all of my students, they really like this, like platforms, design platforms, and they basically use most of them. Finally, here is the grammar checklist, which was devised by one of my learners. This guy was struggling with the grammar, and this guy was basically struggling with tenses. And he devised the following like checklist for himself. Is it present, past, or future? Is it a process, a result, or a fact? Is the time period specified? Are there any clues in the sentence or text? So every time he forgets something, he looks at his checklist. So probably it's not the best checklist in the world. And pedagogically speaking, it's a little bit strange. But this is something designed by the learner himself or herself. So basically, it works with this particular learner. By the way, other members of the group are also using this checklist. I don't know, they just liked it. Okay, so this is the final slide. This is me. Thank you very much. Yes, and I will be really happy to hear your questions, because infographics and grammar, this is a topic to discover and rediscover again and again. So please, if you have any questions, please write in the chat. I will be happy to answer.